freedom to criticize, make your opinions heard, even if you sound absurd. Review anything, no matter what it is.
Hello chums, and welcome to Review Anything. I'm your host, Sour Apple. Let's hit the review generator and find out what we're analysing today, shall we? Mona the Vampire, a Canadian cartoon series based on some children's books of the same name. Let's sink our teeth into this show, shall we?
Mona the Vampire follows the adventures of a girl called Mona, who has a vampire alter ego. With the help of her friends Charlie and Lily, who have the alter egos of Zapman and Princess Giant, Mona takes on mysterious evil that enters her town. However, these troubles are the work of Mona's own imagination, so in reality, Mona is just playing a game with her friends.
What bothers me the most about Mona the Vampire has to be that we as the audience are aware that the monsters and villains attacking Mona are figments of her imagination. Therefore, there's a lack of tension or conflict, because it's hard to be afraid for our hero when we know that the dangers aren't real.
However, sometimes the real-life conflict can be tense enough to mirror the action in the fictitious conflict, and Mona's imagination can sometimes be engaging enough to distract us from the fact that these fantasy conflicts aren't incorporated into the reality of the show. Mona provides some interesting ideas, and sometimes her imagination is presented in a stylized vision. However, several things irritate me in the execution of how Mona's imagination is portrayed. A ripple effect is used as a transition to separate reality from fiction in the show. This ripple gets very annoying sometimes, especially when the crossover from reality to Mona's imagination only lasts a few seconds. Once I saw a ripple transition was about to appear in an episode, I would suddenly be comforted to know what I was about to see wasn't really happening, so I shouldn't worry. This really weakens any potential excitement concerning an episode's story. Then there's the way that perception is executed. Sometimes we don't even get to see what's really happening while Mona's imagination is taking over. It also bothered me when a perception wouldn't make sense if the episode cut to a fantasy taking place away from Mona's vision. Like a fantasy story sometimes carries on in a completely different part of town that she's not in. This created the brain-numbing confusion over what was Mona's imagination and what was reality.
Mona the Vampire has an interesting concept, but it sometimes fails when communicating the differences between reality and fantasy to the audience. Okay, so let's look at the characters of Mona the Vampire.
Mona Parker is a wonderful character. She's quirky, eccentric, imaginative, creative, determined, funny, and confident. However, she's so stubborn about believing reality, and this gets annoying despite being intentional. She even continues to deny all the facts when someone explains the truth to her. This gets very irritating sometimes, even though it's done on purpose. Her imagination also can be damaging. She'll often cause distress to other characters with no remorse for her actions. It kind of makes her come off as selfish and uncaring sometimes. She'll pay the price for her actions, but this is very rare because many of the adults are way too forgiving when she screws up. Sometimes her imagination can raise false hopes for other characters. It's kind of unsettling. In addition, when Mona changes into her vampire costume, nothing really develops. She doesn't get stronger, smarter, or faster. She also doesn't have a consistent vampire trait that enhances her abilities or causes a weakness. So the whole vampire alter ego thing is a bit pointless. I mean, Mona's imagination kicks in her human and vampire identity, so her vampire costume isn't the root of her imagination. But what's cute is that Mona believes that her vampire identity is like a superhero, and she considers herself to be a good vampire as opposed to an evil vampire. Mona may be clouded in her own fantasy ideas, but she'll sometimes appreciate reality, and when she does come across one of her creations, then she'll sometimes research the monster to find out its weakness. In some cases, she doesn't come across a monster or villain, but a creature in help instead. She finds it her duty to help this creature, so she sees herself as a hero, but only in the sense of her imagination. This is almost tragic.
Mona's imagination is also wonderfully consistent. If she establishes a perception, then it remains in her mind throughout other episodes, and this is because she's so stubborn to embrace reality. She creates her own universe around her. It's fantastic. What's also interesting is that Mona's imagination is so strong that it will sometimes fuel her paranoia or worst fears. For example, in one episode, Mona lends her comic book to Charlie, and her mind starts conjuring up strange and ludicrous possibilities for what could endanger her comic book. Mona also sometimes relies on lies to convince others that her imagination is real, even going as far as manipulating reality so that it fits her imagination. There's something brilliantly devious about Mona. She's such a fantastic character.
Now, Mona may have a consistent personality, a cheeky dark side, and a running interest in horror myths and legends, but her friends Lily and Charlie don't seem to have any concentrated personality at all. They're just there. They exist. Sure, Lily and Charlie get their own stories sometimes, but they don't have any concrete character traits or established charismas that become consistent in every episode.
However, Lily and Charlie do help Mona out with her imagination. Charlie's alter ego, Zapman, has a gun that helps defeat monsters, and they don't both tease Mona or freak out over her quirky behaviour. This gives the impression that all three of these kids have a strong bond because they play off each other's creativity, and don't feel uneased by Mona's way of thinking. I like this. The show does have a running focus on a friendship between some very imaginative kids. It's just a shame that only one of these kids actually has any personality. Mona's parents are very accepting of their daughter's unusual behaviour and don't mind her strong interest in horror or mythology. It's never seemed to bother them that Mona dresses up as an alter ego for fun, but at the same time, Mona's mum and dad will sometimes discipline Mona if she's out of line, so they don't exactly spoil her. It does get annoying when her parents forgive Mona too easily, though. The only running antagonists that exist in Mona's reality are her classmates George, an aggressive and rude boy, and Angela, a stuck-up and wealthy girl that spends most of her time bragging about her luxuries. She's fun to hate, but she's nothing new. The rich brat character is a common antagonist in most cartoons. However, I actually found myself sympathetic for her despite her attempts at belittling or tricking Mona. You see, Angela is actually often the victim of Mona's imagination in most cases. There's also many other sideline characters and guest characters. They're your typical townspeople characters, but what bugs me the most is that the adult characters don't behave very realistically. The adults in Mona the Vampire often act like children, and can be way too forgiving of Mona's actions. Sure, she pays the price in most cases, but there are frequent occasions where an adult is surprisingly unaffected by her accidents.
So, those are my thoughts on the characters of Mona the Vampire. Except Mona, they're not very memorable, but none of them are horrendously annoying.
Now, I do have some other problems with the show, like the fact that characters will sometimes rely on Deus Ex Machina to solve a problem, because they have their own imagination at their disposal. However, this is how children behave when playing. They'll often make things up as their story goes along. I think this is the only case where I can forgive a show for its heavy use of Deus Ex Machina, just because it works for the series concept. Mona, Charlie, and Lily aren't stupid either. They're educated about certain things, but they get so caught up in their fantasy world that they often avoid any logic. The animation in Mona the Vampire isn't very impressive. There's quite a lot of 3 or 4 frame loops at times, but the animation conveys its imagery clearly, plus the show will often rely on shadows to get across its movement.
The lighting and colours used in scenes are sometimes very superb. The character designs are generic, and some of the adult characters seem to have cherubic, childlike faces, but I really like the rosy cheeks, soft eyeliner, and long, distinct eyelashes on the girl characters. These things make the characters look very pretty. I also like Mona's dad's face. It looks tired and matches his nervous voice. I also adore the design for Mona's vampire-themed pajamas. Who wouldn't want PJs like them? The theme song for Mona the Vampire is a wonderfully funky opening that's catchy and very memorable. Unfortunately, the music score throughout Mona the Vampire episodes is very bland and doesn't match the quality of the show's theme song. But none of the background music is distracting or painful to hear. The voice acting for each character is acceptable. There's no standout performances, but the voices all fit their characters, and it's unique to hear children's voices coming out of the younger characters rather than the usual grown woman doing a squeaky voice.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's review. I know it's quite short compared to my previous reviews, but you see, Mona the Vampire is a very simplistic and repetitive show. It's not that complex to deserve a pro and con treatment. So, feel free to watch my other reviews if you haven't seen any of them. And feel free to also subscribe to my channel or comment below. I also have Twitter, so go ahead and follow me on Twitter. Goodbye, chums.